Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. This is our weekly webcast from the Virsec Security Labs with our vulnerability analysis of the most pressing threats that we've identified from the last week. This is covering the week starting November 23rd. And thanks as always, and welcome Satya Gupta, our founder and CTO.
Thank you.
So Satya, I guess let's look at the summary. I know it's another busy week. We typically target 5, and last week we had 7, and we have 7 again this week. So I guess that keeps us busy, but not a good trend.
Yes, absolutely. There were 310 new vulnerabilities that were reported into the database this time. And, I tried my level best to kind of cut back on the ones that did not have as much prevalence as, these other ones did. And, I couldn't trim it down any further. There's at least 7 that have very serious risk ramifications on our customers. So I guess we need to be able to talk about them.
And that's a lot. Probably the attackers don't take off Thanksgiving, but I would imagine people at NIST did. So that's a large number.
Absolutely. So we're going to be talking about these 7 here. There's one that is related to VMware's SD-WAN orchestrator. We're also going to talk about an open source product that's very heavily used to render images, ImageMagick. We also have Schneider Electric's SCADA and IGSS SCADA. It's really interesting, Billy. This is one of the oldest, but the very first SCADA that ever came into being. Is used by a whole bunch of manufacturing operations in Europe, so that's why I had to end up picking it.
Okay.
We have IBM DB2. This is a server that's used for by IBM for its artificial learning intelligence applications and all. So that is no good if the artificial intelligence gets corrupted. That really messes things up. Then I picked one for GitLab. There's a serious ramification here. I can, with this vulnerability, people can overwrite other people's code. That's not very good. Then I had to pick one for Golang, which is, a language of choice for many customers. We are going to see a link out there for NetApp. How many products of NetApp are involved out here? And then we have Trend Micro, which is again one of those confused deputy issues where the person who's supposed to keep you safe himself gets corrupted. That's not very good. So those are the 7 that I picked for this week.
All right, and maybe scroll down a little bit, Satya. I just want to mention this is new in our reports this week. We have a new way to display this, what we're calling the Virsec Risk Index. Past week, Satya has shown a spreadsheet where we score across all these different vectors: prevalence, attack vector, complexity, privileges, user interaction, scope, confidentiality, integrity, availability. There are 10 of them and a publicly available exploit. So we've come up with a more graphical way to show whether each of these factors is low, medium, or high, and then our combined risk index based on that. So we'll show that with each of these embedded in the report now. So I guess, Satya, let's go to the first one.
Yes, as we discussed, the very first one is related to VMware's SD-WAN orchestrator product. This is a SQL injection vulnerability in the orchestrator, which is which manages how applications are the infrastructure essentially, and it carries a database of users, of products, and switches, and a whole bunch of other information. So a SQL injection vulnerability in that setup can become pretty bad. It can potentially destabilize or cause a whole bunch of business disruption and all. And in the best case, of a SQL injection vulnerability, you'd be ferreting out information about the enterprise setup. But in the worst case, you could drop tables, and which means a whole bunch of configuration information could be lost forever. Or another nasty consequence of SQL injection is that people could actually plant a web shell into the product, and then they would achieve persistence. It can come and go, and you'd not know for a very long time what happened essentially out here.
So the way a WAN orchestrator would be touching a lot of pieces or deploying lots of different pieces of software, so it could be widespread.
Exactly. I mean, the WAN or SD-WAN is basically it configures in somebody's data center. You could actually reconfigure the networking and all essentially. And so, you could potentially, if I were a malicious user, I could, cut off all network connectivity, or, I could rewire your entire IT infrastructure and all, So there's a very serious ramification. It could potentially cause a whole bunch of outage in the company.
And here I see you've highlighted that a CVSS score has not been assigned yet. So that typically, I guess, means they're just still analyzing it. But I guess we've gone ahead with our index and
yes.
rated it.
So actually, in this particular case, I found in VMware's own assessment, they had assigned it a score of medium, 6.3. But they've kind of put together a position where the SQL injection vulnerability kind of just simply passes, confidential information. But I think, as far as SQL injection vulnerabilities go, they can actually cause much more nastier after effects. So, I've kind of, when I plotted the Virsec risk, I've actually bumped up the consequences, the integrity, the confidentiality, and availability. As we mentioned, as we talked about before, the SD-WAN can be used to rewire your infrastructure. So in that scenario, many things can become unavailable. So, this is where I can kind of, if you look at the availability that VMware is assigned to it, it's low. But I would say that, by no means is, being able to rewire your infrastructure makes it a low availability situation at all.
And then on our scorecard, 77 doesn't sound that bad, but really because it's maybe has a limited scope, which is good, but it still can be very serious within that scope, right? So it doesn't mean take it lightly.
Yes, absolutely. And so, typically why the score goes up even up to the extremes is because if the attacker can actually run their own code, getting data, stealing data is one thing, but being able to run a code and be able to overrun the server is what takes it to 100%, closer to 100%. So this SQL injection attack sort of comes close, and in that event, in that bad situation that I talked about, where you're able to drop a web shell on that server, then it would actually start approaching that 100% limit. So just to be sort of be mindful that not if the attacker, it's really if you think about it, getting in, finding a vulnerability is like a gold mine. But if you think of it like an attacker standing outside your door, you can put all kinds of chains and locks and things like those, and make it very difficult for the attacker. But once they're in, once they've gotten past that one barrier, then they have a free run inside your building essentially, right, or your home. So you don't control the narrative at that point. The attacker controls the narrative. Until they're out, you control the narrative. As soon as they get in, then they control the narrative. What they can do after they get in is completely up to them, essentially. So this is why a SQL injection vulnerability can do a whole bunch of variable things that we have to be cognizant of. And so it's not just necessarily that I would just simply steal information from there. I could potentially do really nasty things once I have a SQL injection vulnerability. It's one of those very dangerous attacks that, as you remember from MITRE's list, it's near the top of that list.
Okay. All right. So what's next?
And if you, one last thing on this, really. So as you can see, the databases that are in question here are customers, partners, gateway pools, orchestrator, authentication modes, everything that the SD-WAN basically touches can get compromised here.
Okay, so that touches a lot of things.
Yes. And so this is a pictorial view of what it does. People use this in AWS. You can have your picture, your infrastructure completely completely compromised essentially.
Okay.
And of course, fortunately there's no public exploit available here, but this could become very damaging. A SQL injection vulnerability is not that difficult to sort of emulate, and I'm pretty sure it's just a matter of time before somebody actually finds how to poke in there and come back. There are automated tools that can actually discover all of this stuff. So I wouldn't set store on the fact that there's no public exploit available.
Right.
So
Right.
again, as far as the Virsec security platform is concerned, again, VSP Web, our solution called VSP Web, will be able to protect users from this vulnerability.
Okay, so the next one is ImageMagick. This is a buffer overflow, and I know buffer overflows are always very concerning because not a lot of products can detect or stop them.
Yes, exactly. And as you can see, the risk index is very high because the buffer overflow gives a user or an attacker a way in into the box very, very easily. You don't even have to have very complicated attack techniques at that point. So ImageMagick, as we talked about earlier, is an open source tool that is used very heavily to create, edit, compose, and manage images in your web applications. It has over 200 different formats that you can actually play around with. And what makes this a very nasty attack is that of course, the source code is available on the in GitHub, and so is a publicly available exploit. It's posted publicly for anybody to use essentially. Okay. And this again, I disagree with the classification where it's been shown that this attack can happen in the local domain, and the attack vector is local. There are cases where it can be done over the network. So in our own scoring, I have sort of marked it up for that reason. Some user called who's actually has a presence in GitHub has actually posted a proof of concept exploit that can be run by anybody at that point. And once again, the Virsec security platform can detect against these buffer overflow vulnerabilities and can save customers from being attacked essentially.
Okay. So the next one, you mentioned Schneider Electric, and full disclosure, they're a good partner of ours and we work closely with them. I also know they've been very proactive when there are vulnerabilities discovered in their equipment. But as you mentioned before, this is one of their, inherent with the SCADA world is legacy equipment, legacy systems that have been around a long, long time.
Yes.
Tell us about
absolutely.
this one.
Yes, so this SCADA is, it's a full-featured, SCADA for that's very heavily used in the process control and supervision of that process control system. So some of the noteworthy, there's a very large list of manufacturing facilities that use them. If I go to the vendor site, Schneider site, there's a very large number of users. One of the biggest names I picked out there was the Europe's biogas producer, Nature Energy, and there are a few others that are listed out there. And this vulnerability is a buffer overflow vulnerability. It can change some configuration files, and which changes the configuration that is loaded into the SCADA, and it kind of affects the availability. But fortunately, there is no public domain exploit, and Schneider has actually published some updates for it very, very promptly. So that is good news that customers can take advantage of. And again, Virsec security platform will be able to protect both at the VSP memory, and the VSP host component can protect against these arbitrary file changes that are triggered by the initial vulnerability is the buffer overflow vulnerability, but then the attacker goes and promptly changes files out there. Both those those operations can be detected reliably by VSP.
And I know there are two big factors in the ICS world, both legacy systems and patching is often difficult. So, and we did a webinar on patching just last week, but I think it's critical that Virsec can protect these in any state that they're in without,
absolutely,
because there's often reasons why you can't bring down a system, and patches often, are dangerous in the ICS world.
Absolutely, and it has very large ramifications. So I can totally see why an enterprise would not be able to patch as promptly as they do in the IT network, because there's safety and considerations that have to and downtime, consideration that directly affect revenue and safety. So it's easier said than done. Those are the considerations in the OT sector that we have to be mindful of here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the fourth vulnerability I've selected is the IBM DB2 stack. DB2 is a very fast in-memory database that IBM is very proud of. It is used, they call it the AI database, and it is what is used to empower intelligent business with multimodal management. It uses machine learning algorithms to speed up queries. And it's really a very sophisticated user base is represented. Their financial sector in companies like JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, and Geico, and all, to name a few. But fortunately, there's no public exploit available as yet. But and its score is 8.4, which is a very high vulnerability. It basically is a buffer overflow vulnerability that with the Virsec security platform that we can actually very easily prevent against this attack.
Okay, and I guess if it's AI-driven tool, then again, the ramifications seem like they could be significant.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you don't want your databases, your knowledge bases that the AI is picking up or creating to get compromised. So that would not be very good. Okay, so the fifth vulnerability I've selected here is a GitLab vulnerability. It's a path traversal vulnerability that is allows an attacker to overwrite content in the GitLab repository. So it has the potential of overrunning code files that are present in the GitLab. So it is potentially it can ruin your source code essentially. That's why I've kind of rated it high. Again, a public vulnerability is not available, but because you're dealing with your CI/CD, and GitLab is very extensively used in the CI/CD cycle, and it's the source code management. It would not be very good if your own source code gets destroyed. So this is why this one is it's been rated high.
And I know GitLab is very popular and widely used, but it also seems like it's up here almost every week in some manner. The amount of IP stored on GitLab for companies seems to be extremely high.
Exactly, and it's a very nice functionality, but it's also as you rightly mentioned, that it's going through a bunch of churn right now.
Yeah. Okay. So be cautious and obviously pay attention to any of these GitLab vulnerabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're deploying a GitLab server, please make sure that it is protected by VSP Web, which could have easily protected your path traversal vulnerabilities out there.
Okay.
So the sixth vulnerability that I've picked because of its far-reaching consequences is, the Go programming language, Golang. Golang uses a tool called CGO that allows you to import code that has been written in C. And there's one of those compiler options that allows arbitrary files to be named. So that particular option is used to push in symbol files, but a malicious actor could, instead of supplying symbol files, it actually could provide some malicious code that would get folded into your own code base essentially. So Golang would actually obligingly kind of turn malicious code and put it into suck those files, and we actually put it into your code essentially. An attacker could come in and subsequently could actually execute those files essentially very easily. It's like not even having a vulnerability, but it's like packing malware into your own code base essentially.
Right. Yeah, that's frightening. So it's upstream in the supply chain, I guess, or in development, and then you build the backdoor in or the malware, and it's
yeah, very much so. I was looking at a NetApp link out here. If I were to go to that particular link, I would see that NetApp. If the consequence on NetApp is that there's like look at the number of products that that are affected here. Let me flip to that here. Look at this list, Willie. Products that are affected. These are the 3 products that are not affected. Is this long list here? But anybody who's using these products out here would be well advised to sort of they on very short notice they'd have to release patches for this that creates a whole bunch of churn at NetApp. And imagine how many products are powered using Golang. And there are big players, as we know, who have very serious adoption of Go. Right here in the Silicon Valley. So a lot of churn would have happened.
So you may not use Golang or be familiar with it, but your vendor might, and
exactly.
cause you problems. Sure.
Exactly. And the description that these gentlemen have actually put together in on this company's blog is extensive enough that you could build an exploit fairly readily.
Okay. All right. Now we're down to the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. So because these are malicious files that are packaged into your products, we could actually protect those against from being exploited using our VST host and our application control capabilities in there.
Okay.
And my last exploit here or vulnerability relates to this confused deputy situation that we always pick up on every week. This relates to Trend Micro's Interscan Web Security Appliance. This is an on-premise secure solution that basically secures your web gateway and ensures that threats don't come in through that web gateway. And it also provides users with real-time visibility and and how employees are using the internet. So this is if I could potentially subvert this particular with this particular security control, then it's a case of the deputy is itself compromised or the emperor has no clothes out here. So fortunately, this has been fixed by the vendor, and it affects one specific virtual appliance version. It's being marked by NVD as 9.8 critical. This is as hot as it gets. It was found by Tenable. There's no a public domain exploit is also available. So this is what makes it especially dangerous when there's a public domain exploits available. Anybody can start going and attacking your infrastructure. So anybody who's deploying this product, this particular version, should be very careful of what is going up. And
yeah,
of course,
I imagine a lot of people don't necessarily think of their security products as being vulnerable or being able to be, I guess, taken out of line. So you have a false sense of security.
Exactly.
We have one of these just about every week.
Exactly. And this, I dumped a whole bunch, but if I look at Tenable's notification, I'm sorry, Trend Micro's notification out there, they have like several of them listed. I just picked one of those several exploits, vulnerabilities. But now let me take you.
Our scorecard that was used as the basis for the graphics in the report.
Exactly. And again, I kind of want to focus on a slightly different, a message out here, where the ones that you see in yellow highlighted colors out here is basically where we feel it has been a little underreported essentially. And so if you look at the VMware exploit or the vulnerability 2020-4003, it was a SQL injection vulnerability, and and we talked about how the SQL injection can potentially cause serious disruption. It can leak your data. It could cause integrity problems, drop tables and all that, and its availability problems. I could reconfigure your entire network. So this is why we bumped it up to a 10 rather than the lows that they were assigned before. With ImageMagick, the same thing. We have sort of the case is being made out is that it is a local attack and it requires some user interaction, but a buffer overflow attack is not really require user intervention. It can be lethal without any user interaction as well. And so the others, that you can see here, as we can score the IBM DB2, there's no dispute about their assessment. The Golang, is they talk about very highly complex attack, but that's not really just a flag in the compiler. And I just have a very simple change to make. it can potentially be dropped as a file on by a malicious user. I just simply go and change the configuration file on the build machine, and it's game's over. And there is a public exploit available that can be it's marked as if there's no public exploit available, but if you go through the explanation of the CGO flags and all, it becomes pretty obvious that it is very easy to emulate and perform essentially. So I've kind of the ones that, again, just to reiterate, the ones which have yellow highlighting on them are where our assessment and NVD or vendor assessment is a little different.
All right, good. And maybe we should probably include this as an appendix to our weekly report so that we can see, people can see the scoring behind the graphics.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Satya. A lot to think about there. I guess we just have to expect it's going to be this busy every week.
Absolutely.
So we probably just picking 5 won't be realistic. But thanks again, as always, great insight. Thank you to the audience. And please look at our blogs on each of these, read the report, and let us know your feedback. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.